Okay, press the button. It goes green and you can hear me. I'm not on mute any longer. So, yes? You want me to stand there?
Let me start.
All right. This is the camera spot.
Oh,
all right.
Okay.
All right. So I need to be in it at the moment. Well, welcome everybody to the 33rd Tucker Millward Lecture. For the first time, being streamed live on YouTube. Now, for obvious reasons, this is the first lecture since 2019, and on behalf of the Kent Law School and the Kent Law Society, we're very pleased to see so many of you here today. Now, it's apt timing that this year this lecture is taking place during the Division for the Study of Law, Society and Social Justice's Social Justice Week, where the focus is on collaboration and impact. And Kent Law School greatly values the collaborative ties between us and the Kent Law Society. Members of the legal profession in Kent have for many years supported our award-winning law clinic, which provides pro bono advice to local people unable to afford legal representation. And Kent Law Society members also give up their time to help on our negotiation module to judge our moots, to act as witnesses and defendants in our mock trials and in client interviews. And they put students through their paces in mock job interviews in order to enhance their employability skills. And lately, some Kent Law Society members have offered paid paralegal positions at their firms to complement student studies on our new M-Law in Advanced Legal Practice course, which will be starting next year. So this lecture is a good annual opportunity for our two organisations to come together and to celebrate our special relationship. Now, this annual lecture first came about due to the death of Keith Tucker. Keith was a partner in the law practice of Gill Turner Tucker in Maidstone. He was made Honorary Secretary of the Law Society in 1981, but sadly died in a car accident shortly afterwards. Now, Keith was a well-respected and popular member of the Kent Law Society and had been active in the society and the community. His colleagues were shocked and saddened by his untimely death, and the members at the time felt that a lecture in his name would be a fitting memorial. The memorial lectures commenced in 1983 and took place initially in alternate years organised by the Kent Law Society. Since 1987, the lectures have been held at the University of Kent and have attracted many highly distinguished speakers who provided thought-provoking addresses on a variety of issues. And previous Tucker Millward lecturers have included Lord Grimond, after whom this building is named, Lord Hailsham, several directors of public prosecutions, with the strange omission of one particular director who's gone on to a political career, Sir Geoffrey Nice, Professor Joanne Conahan, one of my predecessors as the head of Kent Law School, Lucy Scott Moncrief, who's an alumna of ours and former president of the Law Society of England and Wales, and Baroness Shami Chakrabarti. In 2017, Kent Law Society and Kent Law School agreed to rename the lecture the Tucker Millward Lecture in order to honour Edwina Millward alongside Keith Tucker. And Edwina Millward had been in partnership with Keith Tucker and later became president of the Law Society and a district judge. After her retirement from the bench, she kindly acted as one of the judges of the annual Kent Law Society Awards and had done so only weeks before her untimely death. She supported the Society and its members over many years. She was also the first female president of the Association of District Judges. Originally a domestic science teacher, she was encouraged by her head teacher to retrain as a lawyer and provided an example of diversity and trailblazing in the judicial world of Kent. Which leads me neatly onto our guest lecturer for this evening. To her honour, Judge Sarah Davies completed a law degree at Kent, being one of the first members of her family to go to university. After graduating, she worked as a legal advisor to magistrates, did her bar exams without being taught by borrowing someone's notes, and then worked for a local authority. She eventually saved up enough money to undertake her pupillage, which was unpaid at that time, by lecturing most evenings all over London and working as a cleaner. After failing to find a tenancy, she became a lecturer at City University, teaching anything that no one else wanted to teach, including banking law. Who would want to teach that? As well as export and import law and employment law for engineers. And after 3 years, including time researching insolvency law for one of the big accountancy firms, Sarah eventually obtained a tenancy in a newly established chambers before eventually moving to One Pump Court in the Temple, which had the distinction of being the only chambers in the pre-Equality Act days not to discriminate against anyone because of their race, sexuality, or class. They called themselves radical at the time. Sarah spent her career doing initially criminal and family law work, but later focused solely on family law. She acted in one of the first forced marriage cases and one of the first surrogacy cases, specialising eventually in representing parents in public law cases that very often involved serious injuries to babies and small children. In 2013, Sarah became a district judge and sat at Bow County Court and then at East London Family Court. In 2016, she became a circuit judge and moved to Canterbury Combined Court and was also then appointed as a Deputy High Court judge in 2020. And she deals primarily with family cases and Court of Protection work. She's entitled her lecture, Chipping Away at the Glass Ceiling. So please join me in welcoming Her Honour Judge Sarah Davies.
Well, I hope that you can all hear me. I'm not sure if I've gone green. Yes, no, it's flashing. I've entitled my lecture tonight, Chipping Away at the Glass Ceiling. I'm afraid I can't take any credit for the title. That goes to my son, James. However, he's not getting the 10% commission he asked for.
Cheapskate.
As has been said, I attended the University of Kent. I was one of the first in my family to go to university. I had 4 brothers, so law seemed a natural thing to do because I was used to fighting my corner. It's amazing when you're the 4th out of 5 children how hard you have to fight. My parents had not been to university. My father left school at 14 and my mother at 16. My father told me a very sad story. He'd been evacuated during the war and was sent to Somerset to a lovely family on a farm. They were very kind to him and he passed the 11+ and went to grammar school. When he was 14, which incidentally was the school leaving age then, his mother sent him to come home to London, even though the war was still going on. He hadn't seen her for 4 years, so was desperate to go home. He went home on a Saturday and was told by his mother that he was starting work on the Monday, and that was the reason why she'd wanted him to go home. He told me it was the worst day of his life. My mother had got a scholarship at the age of 11 to Putney High School. Unfortunately, the war had started and my grandfather was a prisoner of war for 5 years. During the first year that he was a prisoner of war, they didn't know where he was. He could have, they said, deserted, died, or been a prisoner. They stopped my grandmother's army pay, and my mother, being the oldest of 5 children, had to stay at home to look after everyone while she went out to work. Neither of my parents were bitter about their experiences, but they were determined that the 5 of us would get the best education that we could. I went to a local state school in Norfolk. I had 46 children in my class, many of whom had special needs. I was really left to get on with things. My parents could see that I wasn't doing very much, so they set me maths and English, and I just spent most of my day reading, so I read very widely. One day our teacher said to us that it didn't really matter if we passed the 11 plus. I went home and told my father this, and it was the first time in my life I think I'd seen him really angry. Of course it matters, he said. If you go to the secondary modern school, you won't even do any exams. If you leave school at 16, all your options will be either the chicken factory, because I lived in the country, or shop work. He became a school governor to try and change the ethos of the school so that they would do CSEs. The local grammar school wasn't that much better. The headmaster didn't believe in girls going to university. He told my mother, "Why educate women?" My mother replied, "Because educated women have educated children." He didn't say anything to that, and she became a school governor to try and change the ethos of the grammar school, but she could see it was going to be really hard work. I did work hard and I did pass my 11 plus. My mother looked at options for me and discovered that there were 100% scholarships to some private schools. One of them was quite a mad boarding school on the Suffolk coast. She entered me for the scholarship. I had an interview with a very terrifying headmistress and a lady next to her who wrote down everything I said, and at the age of 11, it was quite an ordeal. Anyway, I chatted quite happily to her and answered her questions. I sat, I think, a maths and English and an IQ paper, and she looked at the results of my 11 plus and agreed to give me a 100% scholarship. I must have been one of the few judges that grew up with parents on benefits. My father had had a very bad car accident when I was about 7, and he hadn't worked for about 6 years. During that time, I had free school meals, and I remember the indignity of being singled out in class and being asked for my lunch money. I remember saying, "I don't pay anything," and being really embarrassed and ashamed about it, and getting my mother to go and talk to the teacher so that I wasn't singled out so much. There were a number of children on free school meals, but I still remember that very clearly. When I went to my secondary school, it was a completely different world. All my uniform had to come from Harrods. My mother thought that I was going to be very tall. How wrong you can be. Everything I had was absolutely enormous. I always looked as though I was wearing somebody else's clothes. My parents had got one uniform grant of £100, and my mother said to me that they couldn't possibly afford to pay any more, so I wasn't to grow. I obeyed that instruction. I enjoyed life at boarding school, although I couldn't do any extracurricular activities or go on school trips. But even still, everyone was very kind to me. I stayed at school when everyone else went on school trips, and the matron used to help me make a cake or do something fun, so I didn't feel quite so left out. The other girls invited me out with them, and we went to afternoon tea at the 5-star hotel in Felixstowe, which was a very, very different experience from anything that I'd seen. When I invited girls back, we had sandwiches on the beach with my parents. After that, I decided that I would come to Kent because I was very impressed by the law clinic. Sadly, it closed the term before I started, and I felt quite aggrieved. Anyway, after I finished my degree, I looked at my options. I looked at the realistic options of becoming a solicitor and the unrealistic option of becoming a barrister. I say unrealistic because at the time you had to do, I think, 6 months unpaid pupillage with no guarantee you receive any work for the next 6 months and keep yourself for that time. I had no idea how I'd ever do that. I went to see one of the careers advisors at the University of Kent. She pointed out to me that most barristers had a degree from Oxbridge. I came from Kent. She pointed out to me that I had no family connections. I had no money, and she couldn't, and also that I was a woman, and there weren't very many women in English legal life at that stage, particularly at the bar. The shocking statistic is, I think in 1939, there were only 12 female barristers, and things were very slow to develop. I worked for a local firm in Canterbury doing probate and conveyancing on the basis that I thought I'd give it a go and see what it was like. All my clients were dead or moving. I never saw anybody at all, apart from my rather older secretary, who was very kind to me, who insisted on calling me Miss Davis, and I was always very keen to make her a cup of tea, which wasn't the done thing at all. I went back to the careers advisor and said, what can I do that's more interesting? She said, why don't you think about becoming a legal advisor to magistrates, or a magistrate's clerk, as they were then called? I said to her, well, how do I do that? And she said, well, just write to some magistrates' courts and see what they say. So I wrote to all the courts in the country, and Birmingham replied. I'd never been to Birmingham, but I got a train and went for an interview. They told me that they had 28 male clerks, 1 female clerk, and they thought perhaps they should have a second. Tokenism was my friend. Anyway, I moved to Birmingham. I went up to see where I was going to work the week before. I also had to find somewhere to live, and of course this was the pre-internet days. I looked in the local paper and couldn't see very much. In desperation, I got on a bus, waited for 20 minutes, got off the bus, found a newsagent's window with an advert for a room. It was with an old lady, and I have to say it was probably the dampest room I have ever seen. It had things living on the walls. She told me that I could only have 2 baths a week, and I had to light a gas geyser to have them, which was absolutely terrifying, because it almost exploded. I joined a gym, not necessarily to go, but to have a shower. I started work, and after about 3 months, I was really enjoying myself. I trained for quite a few weeks sitting in court, and then I was told I could start on my own, and this was just with a law degree. I was told that I could be trained as a barrister or sent to bar school, and they would pay for me, which I was very pleased about. However, I discovered that there was a 4-year waiting list. I was only being paid £4,500, which was very little even then, and I couldn't see how I was going to survive 4 years. In the meantime, the clerk to the justices sent for me and told me that they had forgotten to get Home Office approval for my job. Did I want to leave? I said no, because I didn't have another job, and I couldn't possibly understand what I was going to do stuck in Birmingham, because I'd paid a month's rent. Well, he said, if you won't leave, then we might have to take other matters into our hands. And I said, what do you mean? Well, tomorrow morning, he said, you're going to be watching porn. Goodness, I said. He said, that might persuade you to leave. The male clerks were absolutely furious. I should explain that they weren't just simply watching porn on their own. The magistrates had to watch the porn with a member of the, I think, police porn squad, who had confiscated the porn from shops and other places selling it. The magistrates had to say whether it would corrupt and deprave. The magistrates were very, very worried about me. I was 21, I was unmarried, and they thought it might put me off marriage, although what it had to do with it, I couldn't possibly say. They went to the clerk, to the magistrates, and said, we don't think Miss Davies should be doing this. He said, she's over 18, she's doing it, we're trying to persuade her to leave. So that started 6 months of watching porn in the morning and traffic court in the afternoon. Quite a lot of it was very boring. There's not much storyline. I I never quite understood the plastic Mac Brigade or the mud wrestling, but it did have its funny moments. One day I was watching porn with Lady Cadbury. I never thought I'd say that sentence. Suddenly she said to me, "My dear, what are they doing?" I looked and gulped. I thought, I can't possibly explain this. So I said to her, "I don't know, I'm unmarried." I said, "I'm sure the officer will explain to you." He looked at me and said, under his breath, "Thanks a bunch." "Madam," he said, "this is what we call oral sex." "Goodness," she said, "I thought it was just talking about it." Anyway, I did 6 months watching porn and traffic courts, and I went back to my office one night, and one of the men that I shared an office with was rubbing his arm. He looked a bit grey and peaky, and I said to him, "Are you okay?" "Yes," he said, "I've just got these pins and needles in my arm, and I've got a funny pain in my chest." I said, "I'll ring 999. It looks to me as though there's something wrong." And I thought to myself, he's probably a heart attack. He was very reluctant for me to ring, but I insisted. Unfortunately, he died on his way to hospital. The next morning, I was sent for by the clerk to the justices and told that I had a job, literally dead men's shoes. However much I cried, he just simply said to me, "I don't know why you're crying, you've got a job." It was a very sad time, but I had a job and I thought life was getting better. I then discovered the queue for going to bar school, and I couldn't understand what I could do about it. I wrote to the Bar Council and asked them if I could do my bar exams without attending the course. The only people running the course at that time were the Inns of Court School of Law, and you had to attend. The Bar Council wrote back and said, "Of course you may try and do the bar exams, but of course if you do that, you'll never be allowed to practice." I looked at it and thought about it and decided that actually my salary would double if I got my bar exams, so I had a pretty big incentive for doing them. I found someone who'd done the course before, and he gave me his notes, apart from the time when he was too hungover to go, and I had to try and work out what actually had happened. I bought some books and started studying every night after work. I can't say it was very easy, because I couldn't read quite a lot of his writing, but I eventually decided that I had to give it a go. And I was told that I could take my exams in May, but I had to do, I think it was 24 dinners. This was a very dispiriting occasion, going down to dine. I had to join an inn, and of course I knew absolutely no one, and I was always sat next to all the foreign men. They refused to talk to me because I was a woman. They also were very shocked when I had a glass of wine in desperation of how to pass the time. You were locked in during the dinners, and the food was absolutely dreadful. I was having to pay my train fare and the cost of the dinners, so it was a very expensive exercise. The last night of my last dinner, before I was due to do my exams, I was very ill on the train coming down. At Euston, I crawled off the train and rang Gray's Inn. I said, "I'm very sorry, but I'm so sick, I don't think I can come to dinner, and I have to go home." They told me I had to get a doctor's note, and by the time I got back to Birmingham, it was about 9:15. I couldn't see how I could call a doctor out on the basis that I was simply being sick, so the next morning I persuaded a doctor to write me a note. I duly sent it off to the Bar Council. Imagine my horror when I heard back from the Bar Council, who told me that as I had missed one dinner, I couldn't do my exams. I wrote back and said, "No, I missed it, but I have got a sick note." They wrote back and said, "Yes, but it's for the wrong day. That won't count. You've got to do your dinner before you do your exams. And of course, by then it was vacation and there was no chance for me to do any dinners. So they told me that I'd have to do my exams in September. That was a bit of an issue because I'd taken half-day holidays in May and I wasn't allowed to extend that time or to change my holiday. But in any event, I managed to get a week so that I could work in the mornings and then study in the evenings because you can't revise all day. I had to take time off to go down to London for the exams. I knew nobody, and it was a really horrible experience. When I got my results, I was absolutely delighted because I had passed and I'd done very well. My salary doubled overnight, and I was earning the princely sum of £9,000, which was certainly enough to survive on at that stage. Then I met the father of my children, my first husband, and we moved to Cambridge. He wanted to go into planning and wanted to work for a local authority to get some experience. I tried to find a job as a legal advisor, and there were no vacancies. I spoke to one of the people that had interviewed him, and they were desperate for somebody to do some advocacy and asked me whether I'd consider it. I jumped at the chance. What was not to like? I was allowed to do so because I was employed, even though I hadn't done my pupillage. I prosecuted dirty restaurants. I prosecuted Protection from Eviction Act cases. I was the legal advisor to the Housing Benefit Tribunal. I have to say that was a bit of a difficult one. There was a man in the office, I think who had Asperger's, who loved housing benefit law. I could never quite understand that. He was very kind and used to type me out the law applicable to every case. So of course everybody thought that I was completely brilliant because every case I had, I could instantly tell them what the law was. He used to sit at the back and simply just put his thumb up at me. I discovered as well that one of the local reporters couldn't do shorthand. So when I had a successful prosecution of a local restaurant, he was very bad at getting down the details. I decided the only thing to do was to write him what I called a press release, which was all the details of the case, what had happened, and the result. He, of course, handed it in to his editor, and it was published in full, my words. The Environmental Health Department were overjoyed because the person before me had not wanted to go to court at all. He used to put all the prosecutions in a drawer and then decide that they were out of time. So all the restaurateurs knew in Cambridge there was never any chance of being prosecuted. I really enjoyed my time during that time, and someone told me about some lecturing work that was going at the local further education college, teaching A-level law. I said I'd be very interested. So I started teaching A-level law, and then the person who was teaching the Institute of Legal Executives failed to turn up, so I took their post as well. I then taught, I think, O-level law as well. I've done everything. I then had an idea that if I could find enough lecturing, I could perhaps do my pupillage, because there was no way that I could manage to do it any other way. So I managed to persuade them to employ me most evenings doing something, and I covered for other people who were ill or did anything that anybody wanted me to do. I went to the local chambers and asked if I could be a pupil. My pupil master, as they were called then, interviewed me. He was a very eccentric man. The first question was, if you had to stay late and your boyfriend or husband needed their dinner, would that be a problem? I started my pupillage and I managed to keep myself by lecturing every night. My pupil master, as I said, was very eccentric and a terrible driver. Nobody in chambers would drive with him, and we kept being stopped by the police every time we went out, who couldn't believe that he drove like that without a drink. We had one serious accident where I got whiplash, but he did pay for some physiotherapy. He was on a diet most of the time that I was there. The deal between us was that although I was unpaid, he would provide me with a sandwich every day. He told me that he didn't want me to eat in front of him, so he made me go and stand in the stationery cupboard every day to eat my lunch. The clerks were completely bemused by me, and one of them said to me, "Why do you stand in the stationery cupboard every day?" He was very kind, though, and taught me an awful lot. One day in the Crown Court in Bury St Edmunds, he was rocking backwards and forwards on his feet. He suddenly fell over and split his head open. So I spent, 6 hours in casualty whilst he was, glued up. The next day, he managed to spill a whole carafe of water over the prosecutor. The third day, he turned round to see me, and I realised he had ink all round his face. The fourth day, the judge asked me to stand up in court. That was a terrifying experience. No judges ever spoke to pupil barristers. He said to me, "Miss Davis, I think you ought to take your pupil master in hand and look after him better. Members of the jury, I don't know what Mr. Gore is going to do today." After that, I got a second six in London, and unfortunately I had no work at all. That was a very different experience. My second six pupil master was not a nice man. The first question he asked me was, "What is your private income?" I had absolutely no idea what he was talking about, and I said to him, "Sorry, I don't understand what you're saying. What's your trust fund?" I said, "I don't have a trust fund. That's why I asked to leave a bit early every night so I can get to my first lecture." He looked at me as I was something unpleasant and said, "Well, how are you going to manage?" And I said, "Well, probably pretty badly, but we'll see." I also persuaded my landlord that I could clean for him at weekends, and so I started my life. Every day I go to chambers, which was not a nice experience, and I had to really steel myself to go in because I was the only woman they'd ever had, and they were really not very nice to me. My pupil master drank a lot. He was very rude to me in front of clients, and on one occasion he'd come back from a very long lunch on a Friday afternoon for a conference. I had read the papers, looked up the relevant law, and written out what I thought he should be saying. He came back, and I thought I ought to make him a cup of coffee because he was very unsteady on his feet. When you do criminal work, the stock phrases from police officers is, his speech was slurred, his eyes were glazed, he was unsteady on his feet. I formed the impression that he was drunk. That was certainly true of my pupil master. Anyway, he came in and asked me who had made the coffee, and I said that I had. And he said in front of our clients, "Goodness me, she can't do anything, this girl. I have to show her how to make a decent cup of coffee," grabbed me by the hand and pulled me out of the room. I went back in after he'd gone out to go to the loo, and the solicitor and the client said to me, "Is it always like this?" And I said, No, of course not," thinking they're going to leave. Anyway, they said that they would leave, that they didn't want to be with someone who was drunk, and I was to tell him. I said to them, "Please can you tell the clerks, because if I take, it's going to be my fault." Anyway, he was very angry with me and shouted at me for about 15 minutes. I don't know how I managed to get to the end of that pupillage, but after that I found a third sixth pupillage where I was given some work. I got to know local solicitors, and 3 local solicitors briefed me. One day I had a very late brief, and I went to Westminster Magistrates Court, and there I met one of my instructing solicitors. She looked very surprised to see me and said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "Oh, I had a bit of luck. I haven't had any work this week, so it was a late brief, and I was really happy." She looked really angry and said, "I've been phoning the clerks trying to brief you, and every day they tell me you're busy." At that chambers, there was one tenancy going. They had one other female barrister. The clerks had said to me that they liked women, but it was the members that didn't. The members said to me they liked women, but it was the clerks that didn't. I never really knew what it was, but I realised that the clerks were doing their level best to try and put me off. I waited for the day they were going to vote for who was going to get the tenancy. It was between myself and a male barrister. I'd seen him in court, and I really didn't think much of him. He was also completely obnoxious. He had a very large trust fund, which he never ceased to remind me of. Anyway, on the day of the vote, my pupil master sent me home early. I think he knew the writing was on the wall. At that stage, I was doing all his written work, and also Clive Anderson, the TV radio journalist. I researched the law, I wrote their advices, I typed them out, I gave them to them, and they were meant to pay me a devilling fee, as it was called, for doing their work. I didn't receive a penny from either of them. And every time I hear Clive Anderson on the radio, I think to myself, he owes me money. I was told that I was unsuccessful in getting a tenancy. I was very upset because I had solicitors willing to instruct me, and I would have had a lot of work had my clerks not been sabotaging it. I went for one last interview, which was my only hope of getting a tenancy. They kept me waiting 2.5 hours, and at 8:30, when they finally ushered me in, the first question was, "Why do you want to do pupillage with us?" "I don't," I said. "Oh, well, we don't have any tenancies. Thank you, bye-bye." I think I cried all the way to the tube. I'd had some very dispiriting interviews. At one interview, they said to me, "Well, we have got our one woman, and we don't really need any more." I said, "Well, I didn't know that there was a quota system." "There's not," they said, "but we've got our one woman." The next question was, "How many children are you going to have, and when are you going to have them?" The third question was, "Are you on the pill?" I asked them if they asked the men if they took precautions. They looked at me horrified. I decided enough was enough and that I should end the interview. So I said very firmly, "I think we're probably wasting each other's time, so I think probably I'll call it a day now." I got up to leave. I thought, well, I've done that very well, and then rather spoilt it by falling over a rug. It's quite hard to be huffy when you've fallen over a rug and hurt your ankle. I hopped out. After that, one of the universities, City University, offered me a lectureship. At that stage, I'd been lecturing in anything that nobody else wanted to do, including export-import management law. Who knew there was such a thing? Banking law for banking students, employment law for engineers, and I was allowed to teach a bit on the legal practice course, which I think I taught contract. I had taught all over London, and I remember one of my students, I remember going into a shop in Tooting to buy some milk after a lecture and finding one of my students explaining to the bemused shopkeeper that buying a Mars bar was a contract. I crept out. I spent 3 years at City University, and whilst I really enjoyed my time with the students, I found the other academics quite difficult. In fact, at one stage, the head of department had managed to get rid of everyone, save me. I think he kept me because he thought that I'd do anything that he didn't want to do. I did some research for one of the big accountancy firms, and I was offered some very lucrative jobs. But I didn't want to be an accountant. I didn't want to work for an accountancy firm. I wanted to be a barrister. I saw an advert in the Times for somebody starting their own chambers, and I thought I'd apply. I have to say, he was really quite odd. He interviewed me wearing his slippers. He told me that everyone was against him, and I discovered that every chambers he'd been in, he'd fallen out with. I think he was probably on the spectrum and just didn't really know how to relate to people. But anyway, he said he'd take me on. It was very unusual at that stage for anyone to start chambers outside of the temple, but I thought this was my only chance of ever becoming a barrister, so I joined him. One day at court in Brentford, the judge, after a 3-day trial, asked me to wait behind. Full of trepidation, I was very anxious. He smiled at me and I thought, he can't be telling me off, and said, would you like to come and have a cup of coffee with me? I was completely overawed. A judge asking me for a cup of coffee. So anyway, I went and had coffee with him, and he said to me, I've looked you up. Why are you with this lunatic? I said, well, I was afraid that he was the only person that would have me, and I think I was turned down by every chambers in London at one stage. He said, well, you're going to be tarred with the same brush as him. Your reputation is really going to suffer. And he said, and I think you're rather good. He then told me that he'd phoned his old chambers and arranged for me to have an interview that night. And on his personal recommendation, I managed to join a mainstream set. It was a very grand set. We had a real lord as our head of chambers. He was often bemused by me. I remember him coming in and saying, are you the lady that does the flowers? I had to be introduced to him every time I went to chambers. One year we had our Christmas dinner in the Guards Club. I'd never been to a gentleman's club, and it was a black tie event, and I was very excited. I bought a new dress. We were told we were not allowed to bring spouses, or wives as it said on the diktat, because obviously I was the only woman. They didn't really think about me. I got to the Guards Club and I said that I was there for my chambers party, and they said to me, Madam, we can't allow you in. I was a bit struck by this, and I said, sorry, what do you mean you can't allow me in? It's my barrister's chambers party, it's Christmas party. I'm invited. No, madam, I'm sorry, no unaccompanied women. Goodness, I said, well, can I get somebody down from the party upstairs, and can they verify who I am? All right, madam. So they went and got somebody, and they came down and said, yes, she's a member of our chambers, she's a barrister. The poor men on the desk gasped and said, I am so sorry, madam, we thought you were a high-class tart. I hung on to the high-class bit. The other part is just transactional. Eventually, that chambers, I suppose, disintegrated because the Lord died and everybody left, and I joined One Pump Court. One Pump Court thought that they were radical because they were the only chambers not to discriminate against anyone for anything. It was purely based on merit. As barristers were self-employed, the Sex Discrimination Act and the Race Discrimination Act didn't apply to them in the beginning. And it was some years before they decided it should apply. And I'm very glad that the radical set that I joined is now completely normal. I think there's still a bit miffed about that. I had a very happy life as a barrister. There were, unfortunately, some bad bits, as in every life. One day, I had a brief, and my clerk had phoned me at home and said, will you go to Haringey? I was puzzled by this, and I said, you've never phoned me before to ask me where I'd go anywhere. No, the solicitors wanted to know whether you would go to Haringey. I told them I didn't think there was a court there. And they said, and my clerk said, oh, it's probably one of those funny family proceedings courts, you'll be fine. I got the brief the night before. To my horror, it said Harrogate. I went and bought it. I said to my clerks, I didn't agree to go to Harrogate. And they said, well, we did, so you'll have to go, otherwise you'll make us look really stupid. My clerk had asked me at the time whether I wanted my travel expenses. I said no. How much could a ticket to Haringey cost? I could see now why I'd been asked whether I wanted travel expenses, and I realised my brief fee was so little that I was going to be seriously out of pocket. I went to buy a ticket the night before, And when they told me how much it was, I said to the clerk, I don't want to buy Harrogate, I just want to go there for a bit. I left at something like 4:45 in the morning and got to Harrogate. And then, because it was raining so hard, as I believe it does in Yorkshire, I got a cab because I hadn't got my Watt's Guide to the Courts. This was a very good book, but it was only for the southeast. It told you exactly how to get to court from the station, where the nearest places were to eat. This, of course, was all pre-internet. I got a cab. We drove a couple of 100 yards and stopped. There's the court, madam, he said. I said, you could have told me it was so near. You didn't ask. He wanted £5 for that journey, which 30 years ago was a lot of money. Anyway, I was about an hour and a half in court and I finished, and everyone said to me, why don't you go to Betty's Tea Rooms to have a bun? I looked at the weather. It was still raining hard. It was going to take me 5 hours to get home. I decided if I wanted a bun that much, I could probably buy one in London. I had some very funny cases. I had a man who whispered in my ear that he'd called his partner the K word. K word, I said. All I could think of was knob. My daughter said to me, why do you think he'd spell knob with a K? Anyway, I couldn't think of what he meant. And I said to him in the end, I'm sorry, you've got to tell me because I'm never going to get over this. He whispered in my ear. Shocked, I said, that begins with a C. Does it, he said. Goodness me. Another day I was in court and my client came into court and shouted across the courtroom at her partner, he's not the father of the last child. The judge heard that as he came in. He said to me, Miss Davis, what do you say about what your client has said? And I said, well, I don't really say anything because I've only just heard it. In the meantime, the father, not the father of the last child, was shouting across the courtroom, effing slag. The judge said, right, Miss Davis, sit down, I'll deal with this. What could possibly go wrong, I thought. Madam, he said, stand up. She stood up. I've just heard you say, he said, he's not the father of the last child. That's right, she said. Madam, were you having sexual intercourse with 2 men at the same time? My client looked outraged and went, nah, not at the same time, one after the other. My opponent was laughing so much I had to ask for a short adjournment. When I became a judge, I was always told that judges were out of touch. One day when I went to East London Family Court, I was going up the escalator, and at the top there were lots of drug dogs sniffing for drugs because, of course, Canary Wharf, where East London Family Court is a hotbed of drugs. Everybody in the city apparently takes them, except, of course, judges. The dog got very excited around me. I was feeling a bit frightened because I had been out for dinner the night before in Canary Wharf with the other judges, and I was worried that perhaps I'd put my handbag down in a loo or somewhere like that where there'd perhaps been cocaine. The handler said to me, I'm sorry, madam, the dog thinks you have drugs. Would you like to accompany me? We'd like to search your handbag. At that time, I was also going up the escalator with a group of barristers I'd seen on the train. They looked at me hard, and I said, I'll see you later, and went off with the man. The moral of the story is, never put a sausage after a dinner in your handbag for your dog. I said to the man, I don't think I've got any drugs. I wouldn't have them knowingly. And he said, and I said, but I do have a sausage. Oh, he said, this is the 3rd sausage my dog has found this week. Who else carries sausages in their handbag? I'm delighted, really, that there are so many women here, and it's very nice to see women going into the legal profession. Since I've been a judge, I've tried to encourage as many as possible to apply, and for people to apply for judicial appointment or to come into the law who perhaps would not have done so. I know that my mother was very excited that I'd become a judge, and in her last few years she lived with me in Canterbury. She always said she lived in my garden, but what she meant was that she lived in an annex in my garden. When she told the hospital that, they were horrified and thought that she lived under a tree. My late mother had dementia, and for the last 6 months lived in a home because she was very unwell. Every night I visited her on my way back from work, and every night she'd look at me and say to me uncertainly, "You've been to work, haven't you?" "Yes," I said, "I have." "And you're a barrister, aren't you?" "No," I said, "I've become a judge." "Oh, how marvellous," she said. Every night was Groundhog Day. Every night she was happy. Every night she said to the carer, "My daughter's a judge, you know." And the carer said, "Yes, we know." I've been accused of lots of things whilst I was a barrister. I had a client who was looking at me writing out an order and said to me, "Here," she said, "your writing's illegitimate." "Yes, it is," I said, "it's a bastard to read." She didn't get the joke. I've also had to explain a lot of things to judges. One day I was in the High Court and my client had accused her husband of dogging. The High Court judge was very surprised by this and said to me, "Miss Davis, dogging is taking your dog for a walk with somebody else?" And I thought to myself, oh, I'm going to have to explain this. "No, my lord," I said, "it's having sex in a car and getting people to come and watch you." He looked completely horrified. "Why did they do that?" he said. "I don't know," I said. "I don't do it. I'm just telling them what they do." I've also managed to enlighten the other judges about emojis. This is a terrible thing, and I know the barristers in the room who are in front of me regularly know we have pages and pages of Facebook entries and text messages with emojis. I find these really difficult to read. I have to read them phonetically. One day, I had a woman who said, "And he sent me an aubergine." I was completely puzzled. I said to her, "Is he telling you to eat more fruit and vegetables?" "No," she said, "it's a penis." "Goodness," I said. I looked at it again. It didn't look very much like it to me at all. I've seen all the porn, you know. I went up for lunch. I was sitting next to Judge Scarrett. I said to him, "Do you know what an aubergine emoji is?" "No," he said, "I don't." I explained. He then insisted on telling everyone. The judges at Canterbury Combined Court are now properly educated. They also explained to me what the water sign meant next to the... I didn't go there. I think my parents would be very pleased and very proud that I have managed to achieve so much. I'm extremely grateful to all the help that I've had on the way, and I became a community and diversity judge, which is a very odd title, which means absolutely nothing, and it's a part-time role which is unpaid. All it does mean is that I get an extra 2 days of holiday a year in return for having the marshal or running the marshalling scheme at court and persuading criminal judges in particular to take marshals. They never want to. I also go and talk to solicitors groups, barristers groups, anybody really that will hear me out and see people on their own to try and persuade them to apply for judicial appointment. I should say that I've never had a male barrister who said to me that he didn't think that he was worthy. The females always do. But anyway, I've really enjoyed my time as a barrister. I have loved being a judge, I can't believe I've got to do a job that is interesting, well paid, and so much fun. Whilst normally my day job is pretty grim in terms of what I'm dealing with, it's made so much better by the wonderful staff that I have, the barristers that appear in front of me that are so patient with me, and really the whole job I couldn't say could be better. I've done 10 years nearly as a judge, and I've told my husband I've probably got another 10 years to go. He's not impressed because he wants me to retire. He should never have lied about his age. One of his friends asked me how I didn't know that he was so old. I just said that I thought he'd aged badly. I think I persuaded them not to come in.
I shall try to add to the persuasion.
Carry on.
I don't think they want to do law. I hope everyone sitting here will think about a legal career. I know lots of you have already got one. I've had the best time of my life. Whatever I've done has been really good experience. When I applied to be a district judge, I thought I was applying to be a deputy district judge, because before you apply to be a judge, you're supposed to be a part-time judge, which is a deputy district judge. I'd never told them that I hadn't read the form properly. I was very surprised when I went for the exam, and I asked somebody whether it was for district judge or deputy district judge. They were very snotty and said to me, "District judge, you have to be a deputy before you can apply." Oh well, I thought it'd be good exam practice, so I did it. I got through the exam and got to the interview. I read the small print. If you hadn't been a deputy district judge, you had to persuade them that you were exceptional in some way. I said to my husband, "But I'm not exceptional." "Don't be so wet," he said. "Of course you are. Think of something." When I got to my interview, it all went very well. My husband had locked me in the dining room for weeks at a time to learn my application form. I was word perfect. The last question was, "So tell me, Miss Davies, why are you exceptional?" I then thought back to my days as a legal advisor. I said, "Well, I have taken courts. I was a legal advisor to magistrates." In my head, I kept thinking, don't tell them I was only 21, it was for only 2.5 years, and don't mention the porn. It was the elephant in the room, and I kept thinking they must be able to hear what I'm thinking. Anyway, they had a bit of a conflab, and he said, "Yes, I think that would count. I think that's all right." So I knew at that stage that my interview was going very well. So what I would say that proves to everyone is you never know what's going to come in useful in your life. I didn't know that all those years ago and all that time watching porn would ever get me a job as a judge. So what I would say to every one of you is whatever you do, whatever experiences you have, all experiences are good, and that everything will contribute to your life as a whole. Take any experience you can, use it and run with it. And I hope all of you, the young ones in particular, or the not so young, have a very successful career and as much fun as I have had in my life. Thank you very much.
Green lights flashing. Well, thank you, Your Honour, for a very amusing, inspirational talk, and a talk that's so interesting to listen to in this setting now. And people reference the equality legislation, and sometimes people question, is it really necessary? Has it actually achieved anything? And although you've told it in a very amusing way, some of us will have been sitting there and experiencing sort of trauma on your behalf, I think, for some of the experiences that you you went through and kept going through. So it was truly inspirational. I think we've got time for a few questions, particularly maybe from any of the students here. Have we got a roving mic, Mr. Weir? Has anyone got a question for the judge?
So I bored them all into submission.
I'll ask a question. What would you say the top 5 important qualities for a good judge are?
I think probably being able to listen. It's very hard when you've been a barrister to actually shut up. The barristers here will know what I mean. It's very tempting to talk too much, and you have to really try and steel yourself to actually listen to all the submissions, however tedious sometimes they are. There's one barrister in particular I always think who's trying to bore me into submission, not mentioning any names. It's a male.
And what advice would you give to students here today as to who are looking to pursue a career in the law?
I think about all your options. I remember going to, I actually went to the army recruitment place in Canterbury and asked them whether they would take a woman as a lawyer, because I thought that might be a way of qualifying. And they said no, they didn't take women, and the RAF didn't either. But I'd think about lots of different things if you're struggling to find something to do. I became a legal advisor, I was a university lecturer. I've done lots of things, and I think you need to take any opportunity you're given. And also, it's not necessarily, for me, it wasn't necessarily going in as a barrister and going straight through. I did a lot of things on the way, but I think it's all good experience, and I think it made me feel, having taught export-import management law, that I could probably do anything I tried. You can persuade or you can fool some of the people some of the time.
Okay.
I suppose because I came from a family which argued a lot, and I couldn't believe I could get paid for arguing. I think if you've got 4 brothers, you spend a lot of time, and I had the kind of family that did argue, and my mother would try and make us justify why we felt something or thought something, and I suppose that was the natural thing. I debated at school, and I really enjoyed it. And whilst, of course, there are solicitor advocates, not looking too far away here, who are extremely good, I think it's actually harder to do that because you have a caseload as well as advocacy. And when you're not in the office, you've got clients who are trying to contact you. I know this. So for me, I just wanted to be an advocate. And maybe it's being a bit of a show-off, being the only girl. I think I really enjoyed it. You know, it's horses for courses, whatever you want to do. I've got friends who are very successful solicitors who really love their job. So it really depends what you want to do. And the bar, and what I would say is, if you want to go to the bar and you don't get in, you can always change later on in life. I know at least 2 barristers recently who were solicitors who have now gone to the bar. So it is possible to change later. But you can be a solicitor advocate and be very happy. So I don't think it really matters in that sense.
Hello, Jassal, thank you for the lecture. I was just wondering, after all that hardship that you had to face, where did you find the motivation to keep pushing through?
Well, I suppose if you really want to do something badly enough, you do it. And at times it was very hard. It was extremely hard. You know, after my last interview, I think I cried all the way back to the tube. And I remember one of the drunks I used to speak to saying to me, "Oh, don't worry, it'll get better." And I remember thinking, I'm not sure it will. But, you know, I think you just keep going. If you really want to do something, and it's what I really, really wanted to do. And for somebody from my background, it was completely unimaginable, unachievable. And I just felt that there had to be, because I had instructing solicitors who were prepared to instruct me, I just felt it had to be achievable. And I'm so glad I carried on.
Any more questions at all?
I think we shut them up.
Well, Sarah, thank you so much. You are such a great friend of Kent Law Society and the Kent Law School here, and I can certainly vouch for the fact that you are unstinting in the support you give to our members, particularly our younger members, and you're always allowing people to come and marshal and everything else, and it is very much appreciated, and thank you so much for giving such a fantastic talk for us this evening. We've got you a present. It's a large present.
Thank you very much.
That's
That's lovely. Thank you very much.
your speech shows that you've never rested on your laurels, and this is a laurel. See what we did
Thank
there.
you very much. That's very nice. Thank you very much.
Okay, can I just say very quickly on behalf of Kent Law Society, thank Rosemary and Kent Law School for staging tonight. It's fantastic to be back with the Tucker Millward Lecture. It will be 40 years old next year,
Wow.
and it's testament to the high regard and affection in which both Keith and Edwina were held, that this lecture was first put together, and it's been maintained ever since. And I'm very pleased that Keith Tucker's children, Edward and Sarah, have come over from Sussex tonight joining us. Edwina's husband David couldn't join us this year, but he sends his very best wishes, and we hope to see him in future years. And we hope to see you all next year, when it will be the 40th year that we've been staging this lecture. So thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
That's fantastic.
You're right.
It's fascinating what people